All right, guys. Well, today we're going to finish up our notes for Unit 1 with sections 1.5 and 1.6, which are going to be all about operations of real numbers. So here's going to be our kind of two goals for today, to be able to find sum and differences of real numbers, and then also to be able to find products and quotients of real numbers. So to talk about finding sums and differences, we need to first talk about what an absolute value is. So the absolute value of a number is its distance on a number line from the number 0. Because it's a distance, it's always going to be positive. Distance can never be negative, so it's always going to be a positive value. Additive inverses then are numbers with the same absolute value, but in different directions from 0, or opposite directions from 0. And the inverse property of addition is a new property. We did not talk about this in section 1.3 and 1.4. But basically what this says is that additive inverses always have a sum of 0. To give you some examples of that, that would be like to say that -1 plus 1 is 0. Or 2 plus -2 is 0. -5 plus 5 is 0. In other words, opposite numbers had to be 0. Okay. So here's going to be our rule for adding real numbers. When addends have the same sign, so you're adding two positive numbers or two negative numbers, then we're just going to add together the absolute values and keep the sign the same. Whereas when addends have the different sign, so a positive plus a negative, or vice versa, then this time we're going to subtract their absolute values and then give the answer belonging to the larger or greater absolute value. So let's take a look at a few examples of this. For the first one, we've got 3 plus 4. Both of those are the same sign. We add together their absolute values. 3 plus 4 is 7. And then since they're both positive, we leave our final answer as positive. So let's say we were adding 3 plus -4 this time. Now we're going to subtract. So we're going to take 4 minus 3 is 1, and then keep the sign of the larger number. -4 is larger, so that's going to be -1. So very similar on this next example, -12 plus 7, we're going to subtract the two numbers. 12 minus 7 is 5, and then keep the sign of the larger. -12 has a larger absolute value, so our final answer is going to be negative. For the next example, -18 plus -2. Our signs are the same. We're going to add the two numbers. 18 plus 2 is 20. And then keep the sign the same since they're both negative. That means our final answer is going to be -20. Now we've got a little bit of decimals, but the same rules still apply. We're going to, this time since they're opposite signs, subtract the numbers. 9.5 minus 4.8 is going to be 4.7. 9.5 is the larger number and it's positive, so we're going to leave our final answer as positive. Okay, we are at a try. Remember, this is a good time for you to pause the video, try a few examples on your own, and we will check those shortly. Okay, let's see how you did. So, -16 plus -8. Signs are the same. We add the two numbers. 16 plus 8 is 24. And then since they're both negative, our final answer needs to be -24. For the next one, -11 plus 9. Signs are different. We subtract. 11 minus 9 is 2. 11 is larger, so we'll make it a -2. And then for this last one, we've got 3 over 4 plus -5 over 6. If you're working this by hand, remember, you need to have a common denominator. 4 and 6 both go into 12, so we're going to multiply the first one by 3, the second one by 2. That's going to give us 9 over 12 plus -10 over 12. Our signs are opposite, so we're going to subtract. 10 minus 9 is 1 over 12, and then 10 is obviously larger, so our final answer needs to be negative. Okay, let's take a look at subtraction now. So when we subtract, all we're going to change is that this is going to be like adding the opposite. So in other words, we're going to change it to addition, and then that way we can use all the same rules that we were just using. So let's take a look at some examples of this. So instead of thinking of it as 3 minus 5, let's think of it as 3 plus a negative 5. So our signs are different. We're going to subtract the two numbers. 5 minus 3 is 2. 5 is larger, so we're going to make it a negative 2. So the same idea on this next one. In fact, you probably remember this rule a little bit more easily. When you're subtracting a negative, remember that's the same as adding a positive, and 3 plus 5 is 8. For the next one, same idea. We're going to change this into adding a positive 13. Now our signs are different. We're going to subtract the numbers. 13 minus 8 is 5, and 13 is larger, so we'll leave it positive. So for the next one, we're going to keep doing that same thing, change it to be addition of the opposite, so adding negative 12.4. Our signs are different, so let's go ahead and subtract is 8.9, and then 12.4 was larger, so our final answer needs to be negative. And then for this last one, really probably don't even have to go through this step, but this is a good chance to talk about the inverse property of addition. 9 plus negative 9, those are both opposites. Your final answer is 0. Okay, let's take a look at a couple examples of using addition and subtraction in context now. So it tells us a reef diver goes 25 feet down to the coral reef, or to photograph coral, then rises 16 feet to swim over a ridge before going down 47 to survey the base of the reef. Lastly, she rises 29 feet to get a look at the underground cavern. What is the location of the cavern with respect to sea level? All right, well, let's write a number statement using this information. So we start 25 feet down. Down means negative, so negative 25. Then this diver rises 16 feet, so we'll add 16. Then goes down another 47 feet, so minus 47. Before finally she rises 29 feet, so plus 29. All right, and then let's use a property from our previous lesson. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of associative property. So let's group those up using parentheses. When we do that, keep in mind that there still does need to be addition in between these two. So I'm going to go ahead and write it this way. And let's go ahead and let's do a little bit of addition. So for the first one, opposite signs, we subtract the numbers, keep the sign of the larger. So 25 minus 16 is 9, and 25 is larger, so negative 9. Then for my second parentheses, same idea, 47 minus 29 is 18. 47 is larger, so negative 18. And now we should be ready to add these final two numbers. Take negative 9 plus negative 18 is negative 27. Let's include our label of feet. And this is with respect to the sea level. So let's just write this out. The diver is 27 feet below sea level. And remember, below sea level just because it's negative. Okay. Let's take a look at one more example of this. So a submarine robot sent to explore the ocean floor, which is 803 feet below the surface. So negative 803. As it travels, it must rise 215 feet, so up by 215, as the water level gets shallower. And then plunges 2,619 feet, so minus 2,619. At the end, it then rises another 719 feet before taking a picture of a rock formation on the crevice wall. What is the relative formation of in relation to the sea level? So very similar problem. Again, going to group these up using some parentheses, leave it as addition in between, and let's see if we can't figure out where this submarine robot should be. So the first one, negative 803 plus 215, we're going to once again subtract our two numbers there. It looks like that's going to be 588. And again, since it was negative 803, we'll make it negative 588. Next, for our other parentheses, negative 2,619 plus 719. We're going to subtract those two numbers, 2,619 minus 719. is going to be 1,900. And again, the negative was larger, so we'll leave it as negative. So now one last step, we're going to add together those two numbers. That's going to be negative 2,488. Again, our label there was feet. So in relation to sea level, it looks like this robot is going to be 2,488 feet below sea level. Okay, so that should do it for addition and subtraction. That was our first goal, was to find sums and differences. Now let's take a look at our second goal for today, which is to find products and quotients. In other words, let's switch to multiplying and dividing. So remember, product of two real numbers with different signs is always going to be negative. Whereas the product of two real numbers with the same sign is always going to be positive. So let's take a look at a few examples of this. For the first one, we're taking 12 multiplied by negative 8. So first take 12 times 8 is 96. Opposite signs means that it's going to be negative. For the next problem, 24 times 0.5 or 24 times 1/2. Well, half of 24 is 12. Both of those are positive, so there's our final answer. For the next one, we have negative 3 being squared. As a reminder, that means take negative 3 and multiply it by itself, so negative 3 times negative 3. Well, 3 times 3 is 9, and those are the same sign, so it does end up being positive 9. Finally, for fractions, as a reminder, when you're multiplying together fractions, just multiply going straight across. So take 3 times 1 is 3, 4 times 2 is 8, and then they are different signs, so our final answer does need to be negative. Okay, here's a chance for you guys to try a few on your own. So this would be a good chance to pause the video, work through those 4 problems, and then we will check our work in just a moment. Okay, let's see how you did. 6 times 15 is 90, and those were opposite signs, so your final answer needed to be negative. 12 times 0.2, think of it as 12 times 2, which is 24, and then just move your decimal in between, so your final answer there should have been 2.4. For the next one, negative 4 cubed, this means that you should have written out negative 4 a total of 3 times. So that would have been 4 times 4 times 4, which is 64. Negative times a negative is a positive, but then positive times a negative does end up with a final answer that is negative. And then finally here we've got negative 7/10 times 3/5. Let's multiply going straight across. 7 times 3 is 21. 10 times 5 is 50. And it is a positive times a negative, so final answer does need to be negative. All right, so there's multiplication. In much the same way, division follows a lot of the same rules. So just as with multiplication, if the real numbers have the same sign, then our quotient is going to be positive. Whereas if the real numbers have different signs, then the quotient is going to be negative. Now let's talk about 0, because we didn't really talk about 0 for multiplication, although we kind of did. We said that multiplying by 0 in section 1.3 and 1.4 is always going to be 0. So let's talk about dividing. So the quotient of 0 in any real number is going to be 0. In other words, if you take 0 divided by any number, like 0 divided by 8, that's 0. Now, that is not true in the reverse order. So the quotient of a real number and 0 is actually undefined. That means that if you try to take a real number like 8 and divide by 0, your answer is going to be undefined. It is not 0. So let's take a look at a couple examples of this. For the first one, it says after opening the parachute, skydiver's elevation changes negative 3,600 feet in 4 minutes. What is the average change in the skydiver's elevation each minute? So what we're going to do is we're going to take our negative 3,600 feet, divide that by the 4 minutes, And now let's go ahead and divide. 3,600 divided by 4 is 900. It was negative divided by a positive, so our final answer is negative. And then our label is that we took feet divided by minutes. So there's our final answer. Okay. For the next one, it says, after making 5 equal withdrawals from your bank account, you've taken out $360. How much did you take out with each withdrawal? Well, let's figure it out. If we take $360 and divide that by 5, 360 divided by 5 is $72 per withdrawal. And it was a positive divided by a positive, so our final answer there does need to be positive. Okay, just one last thing to talk about, and we're going to be done with these notes. So, last thing, inverse property of multiplication says that for every non-zero real number a, there is a number 1 over a, so that a times that number is equal to 1. This inverse is what we call the reciprocal, which for the number, again, 1 over a is just a, and vice versa. The product of a number and its reciprocal is always going to be 1. And here's the important part for what we are going to do today. Dividing by a fraction is going to be the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So let's take one example, look at this together, and then there's going to be 2 final ones for you to try on your own. So ask us, what is the value of x over y when x is negative 3/4 and y is negative 2/3? In other words, we're going to take negative 3/4 and divide that by negative 2/3. But a more convenient way to write that is probably going to be to write it using the division symbol rather than using the fraction bar. So what we said in that last sentence, dividing by a fraction is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So in other words, we're going to keep our first fraction the same, change to multiplication by the reciprocal, which is that second fraction flipped. And then we're just going to multiply going straight across. So 3 times 3 is 9, 4 times 2 is 8, and it's a negative times a negative, so our final answer does end up being positive. Okay, here's your last try it. So one last chance, go ahead and pause the video real quick, and then we'll check your answers here in just a moment. Okay, let's see how you did. So once again, this one was already set up kind of nicely for you. Change it to be multiplication, change it to be the reciprocal, and now we should be ready to multiply going straight across. So take 3 times 2 is 6, 4 times 5 is 20, and then change it to be negative. And now, here's where we need to talk about simplifying. Both 6 and 20 are divisible by 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3, 20 divided by 2 is 10, and then we leave our final answer as negative. Okay, one last one to check here. So notice that the negative sign is outside the parentheses. So let's deal with everything inside the parentheses first, and then we'll deal with that negative. So change it to be multiplication, and change it to be the reciprocal. So take that second fraction and flip it. So now, multiply going straight across. 3 times 2 is 6, 4 times 5 is 20, and we're going to leave that answer as negative. Let's go ahead and simplify now. 6 and 20 both divisible by 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 20 divided by 2 is 10. And now we just leave that negative sign in front. So you actually end up with the exact same answer as the problem before. All right, guys, that is it for our notes today, and that is it for the notes in Unit 1. That being said, tomorrow we will most likely be reviewing and then probably taking a quiz or a test sometime on Thursday. That being said, guys, have a great rest of your day. Make sure and get that homework for these sections done by tomorrow at 3 o'clock, and I will hopefully see you tomorrow. Have a good day.